All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another video from ya boy. Today we got quite a topic. We're going to be talking about training for aesthetics in a productive fashion. What? Michael, but you're a starting strength coach. You guys don't care about aesthetics. Kind of. That's sort of true. Everybody cares about aesthetics. But what I'm talking about is training the muscle, let's say. Not quite a movement pattern in the way that we're used to, in a way that supports the main movement pattern and allows it to get stronger. Because that is still your foundation, your base for your strength, right? All right, let's get right into it. Let's talk prerequisites. Who should be doing this sort of thing? The answer is not many. Sorry. The type of person that wants to do this kind of thing probably has a lot of hard work to do before they get to that point. So basically, the type of person that can do this is a late intermediate slash advanced lifter. And you have to be a true late intermediate slash advanced lifter, meaning that we're excluding situational intermediates. We're excluding, and that's a wide breadth of individual, right? So that's basically two main people. One is the type of person that is not going to gain enough weight to get strong enough to actually do the program. So, like, if you're a guy and you weigh, 160 or 150, and you're, not 200, then you're not doing the program. Unless you're like 5 feet tall on the dot, in which case you're probably gonna have to program differently anyways, because you just have a different set of problems to deal with. Or we also have situational intermediates that either are skipping sessions. Basically, they're sabotaging their own progress in some way. They're either skipping sessions, or they're quitting on lifts, or they're getting all they're making emotional decisions that are sabotaging either their programming or their lifts, or trying to go on a cut, that sort of thing, when it's not appropriate. So by the time you've gotten to this point, and I mean, you can even sneak a peek at the sample programs down below. There are, like, I hate to attach numbers to these things, but there are like general ranges of where your lift should be. Like, you should be pretty much approaching or in the ballpark of the sticker lifts. So like benching somewhere between like 275 and 350 probably, squatting between like 365 and 450, deadlifting, a good bit over 4 plates, that sort of thing. If your numbers aren't quite to that point, then you probably haven't run the program as effectively as you could. So go do that first, and then you can start implementing this stuff. Another category is the motor moron, unfortunately, just like genetically very below average. And I'm basically just talking about guys in this video, because women, you just kind of like squat and deadlift for a month or two, and you look great. So this stuff doesn't apply as much. Sorry. But yeah, the the type of dude that's a motor moron, very unfortunate situation. Probably just gonna have to stick with more basic programming, or like very old dudes. But you're probably not watching this video if you're a very old dude. Yeah, so gotta do that first, right? Let's define some of these individuals here. We got late intermediates. That means that you're PRing pretty much once every 3 weeks. So you might have a 3-week cycle, and each of those weeks you're setting a PR. And this is lift by lift. So let's say it's the deadlift, great example. You might be doing a rack pull 1 week, a deadlift 1 week, and a halting deadlift 1 week. And let's say the rack pull is a 1 set of 5 PR, the deadlift is a 1 set of 5 PR, and the halting deadlift is a 1 set of 8 PR, right? So you're hitting a PR for each lift across that 3-week cycle, but you're only PRing the main lift once every 3 weeks. The main difference between that and an advanced lifter is that the advanced lifter is, they're only PRing once every 4 to 6 weeks, but they're probably only setting like 1 to 2 PRs across that, right? So you kind of need like, I guess, deloads in there, which are kind of built in depending on how you are programming at that point. But you can't just be PRing every single week through different rep ranges at that point. By the time you're that strong, you need like some kind of auto regulation built in. So not RPE, something else. Sorry, right? And there's different ways you can do that, right? You can vary the sets, you can vary the reps, and you can vary the exercises themselves. So not going to go into that too much in this video, but basically it's like you can either do good examples are like 5-3-1. Jim Wendler is like varying the reps, right? Little 3-week thing. And then there's like a deload week in there too. So that's basically an advanced program. Then you have exercise selection, which is like, the conjugate as it's known, which I'm not sure if that's actually conjugate or not. You have to ask like Dave Tate. I'm not entirely clear on the definition of that, but basically you're rotating exercises on the max effort at a heavy day. And then you can also do with varying sets too, which is less common, but like if you have someone that is entirely attached to like 5-rep PRs, for example, you could do like 3 sets of 5 in week 1, 2 sets of 5 in week 2, and 1 set of 5 in week 3, and obviously like vary the intensities as you go through that. And you can go all the way up to like 5 sets across 5 weeks, and that's a way to do things, but that's not advised generally. But yeah, so we hinted at aesthetics, right? We know that the main lifts right here, squat, bench, deadlift. And let me back up a little bit. Talk about the press. A lot of this stuff is not going to apply to the press 2.0 because it is such a technical lift, and it requires so much specificity. So your best bang for your buck with the press is just to do the press, and then like throw in some pin presses. That's kind of, worked as long as people have been alive in the starting strength world. And it will probably continue to work for the rest of time. Variations that just don't carry over to the press 2.0 as well. They can work with, if you treat the strict press as the main lift, which there are reasons for doing that. If you're going to do that, then these extra accessory movements will carry over better because it's not a very technical main lift. And then as I go through this list, that is kind of true across the board in the sense that like the bench and the strict press would be the least technical. So you can get away with more variation and things that are less specific to the movement that will actually kind of work well. Whereas the squat is like on the other end of the spectrum where really only things that are very similar to the squat are going to work well. And the deadlift is kind of somewhere in the middle. But yeah, let's talk about these main lifts, all right? So as a novice and an early intermediate, that's, your NLP and then into like your Texas method or heavy light medium or something like that, you're going to get most of your aesthetic gains during that period. And you're going to receive all your aesthetic gains from doing these lifts, right? And there's no reason not to do that because you can add weight to the lift so frequently, so you may as well just do that. Add 5 pounds a workout, 5 pounds a week. At that rate of progress, there's no reason for you to really add anything else in because you're just making progress doing just the lift. So there's no need to waste time doing extra stuff, right? Once you're PRing every 3 weeks plus, and you can wait longer than that, you can start a little bit sooner than that. But at that point, because you have so much time between your PRs, and also the reason that you're PRing less frequently is because your body is very, very well adapted to those main lifts, right? So it's used to getting the same kind of stress over and over again. So you can kind of break it up with these extra movements. So the way they work is basically you're applying, I'll give an example of like the close grip bench, or no, I'll do the high bar, or no, the incline bench. I like the incline bench a lot. All right, let's talk about the bench. Let's not concern ourselves with lower body movements. Who cares about that? All right, so the incline bench to the bench press, the way it works at this stage is you've been benching a ton, right? So you're really used to using the muscles through the ranges of motion in the bench press, right? So each joint that's involved, which would be the shoulder joint and the elbow joint, and you're using them only in the way that is specific to the bench press. And as it turns out, you actually might have a little bit more range of motion on those joints in a different movement that you're not training by just doing the bench, right? Not saying that it's the reason we do the bench press in the starting strength program, for example, is because it is the longest effective range of motion combined with the most amount of weight that we can handle, which is, optimal for getting your pushing strength as strong as possible early on in the program. It's the biggest bang for your buck, and you really just need to do that. And then once you start bringing in these other stuff, then you have now you're really on the margins, right? So you're getting most of your gains from the bench, and then you're getting some marginal gains from stuff like the incline bench, for example, which what that does is it is changing the angle of the bench press. So instead of hitting, you're using your pecs in the bench press, but in the incline bench, there are actually multiple heads in your pecs, right? So it's not just like a pec, like this one thing. There's multiple muscle fibers, and there are multiple different heads, which you can manipulate which ones are being stressed and stimulated with the angle of the bench, right? So if you switch it to an incline bench, what you're doing is you're hitting different fibers in your pec and different heads of your pec that you're not used to hitting, and then you're also kind of doing the same thing with your shoulders and your elbows to a certain degree, because I'm pretty sure there's a longer range of motion on the shoulder in an incline bench compared to a bench or a press even. Because if let's say you're sitting like this, right, your elbow's going to be here. And if you kind of like recline back a little bit, you get your elbow like way down here and get the bar onto your chest there. So you do get a bit longer range of motion on maybe the shoulder and the elbow. I haven't thought about it that much, but there's definitely something else going on there. If you do an incline bench, it feels, at least my opinion, it feels a lot longer than a bench or a press. But basically what you're doing with that movement is, because you're hitting those muscles in a way that they're not used to being hit, and you're training this new range of motion, you're basically taking advantage of a novice effect, right? Because these are things that you are not used to training. So you're using that novice effect, and you can rapidly progress this movement, which is then going to carry over to the main lift. All right, so let's talk about these different classes as I've broken them up. And this is just kind of how I've been thinking about them, because there are, stuff like there's the assistance movements, the supplemental movements, that sort of thing. It's like the supplemental movements are the ones that are closer to the barbell lifts, and the assistance ones are ones that don't look like barbell lifts, and that stuff just gets confusing. So I'm just going to organize them like this. You have the main lift, right? Then the class 1 is something that is very similar to the lift. The class 2 is less similar, and then the class 3 is even less similar. Simple as that. All right, so let's dive into it a little more. So for the class 1 movements, that would be something like, for the squat, for example, something very similar to a squat. So like a box squat, a pause squat, a pin squat, and it's very similar to the lift. So it carries over very well to the main lift, and you could even use it in place of the main lift. So if you have someone that is running the NLP, for example, and they have like issues with, let's say, depth or like an injury or something, like you can just replace the squat with this movement, and then training that movement in the absence of the squat is going to improve your squat. And you can treat it just like the main lift, so you can do it in the same rep ranges, right? You can do 1 to 5 reps, and I'll touch on the rep ranges a bit more in a second. And then even in like, a conjugate setup, you can replace the main movement with one of these variations. So the very close variations, the bread and butter that most people are familiar with. For the squat, it's like, the pause squat, the pin squat, the box squat. For the bench, you've got like close grip bench, pause bench. For the deadlift, it's, rack pull, halting deadlift. There's usually a short list of these that are very effective. All right, so in the class 2, let me talk about the class 3 first, right? So I talked about that novice effect and training muscles in a different fashion. Basically, the class 1, you're training the main movement still. The class 3 is you're training, it's a different movement than any of the main movements, so it looks nothing like it, but you're training the same muscles as you would, you're training the muscles that are going to contribute to the main movement, right? And then class 2 is somewhere in between, where you are training it like a main movement, in the sense that when you're doing these, I'm sure you guys have heard of like, mind muscle connection and like bodybuilding and that sort of thing. Like, a lot of these are going to be done like maybe with, you don't have to go like super slow, but you might have like some kind of control in the tempo. You might include like pauses, and like you might try to stretch the muscle a lot. So you're trying to really, really, you're not just moving the weight from point A to point B. In the class 1, you're moving the weight from point A to point B, because just doing the movement is going to get you the desired result. And in class 2, that's kind of still the case. Like you're really just moving the weight from point A to point B, but just the nature of the angle or the, you're just basically manipulating the joints in the movement so that you're going to get the desired result, because you haven't been using those joints in that way. All right, so the class 2, generally the higher rep range, but some of these you could probably use in the 1 to 5 rep range. But the whole reason for doing these is that you're trying to take advantage of, like say with the incline bench, a range of motion or a specific joint in the movement that you've not taken advantage of before. So in the example of the high bar squat, right, in the low bar squat, you have a certain amount of knee extension happening. And in the high bar squat, you have more knee extension happening. So because you're not used to that extra knee extension, your quads will grow a little bit more because there's kind of a novice effect there where you're training a new range of motion on that joint. So you can basically apply that to like any joint and think of the muscles that cross that joint and think, is there a movement that I could train that's similar to the main movement that is going to accomplish that? And that goes into this category. So you have like the incline bench, the high bar squat, the RDL, the stiff leg deadlift. Still pretty close variations, but I wouldn't necessarily use them in place of the main movement. They're more thought of as accessory movements traditionally. All right, then a class 3 movement. This is where things get all crazy. I have 8 to 15 plus reps. And so I don't want to say that you should be doing like tons and tons of reps for these. You should be just like how with the main lifts, the 5 rep is the, like the 5 rep set is the standard. It is the heaviest that you can possibly load the weight without running into recovery issues, essentially, while still getting, it's like the metabolic middle of all these different rep ranges as far as the energy systems involved and that sort of thing. So with these class 3, you still want to find that range and you want to load them as heavy as you possibly can. And the main thing you're going to run into with these is like just whatever, because you're using fewer joints, whatever joints are involved might start to ache if you load them a bit too heavy. And you might not be able to, control it as much and that sort of thing. So you basically want to find the heaviest possible loading you can do. And depending on the movement, like if you just think of like the smallest possible muscles involved, so like triceps or biceps, for example, if you're doing like an LTE, lying tricep extension, or like a skull crusher or something like that, you're probably gonna have to do more reps because it's a smaller joint. The heavier you load, the more aching you're gonna get. But if you're doing something like a leg curl, or even like a dumbbell bench, for example, you can probably load that a lot heavier, like in the 5 to 6 or even like 5 to 8 rep range, that sort of thing. Lat pull down is kind of the same thing, shins. So that's what you're thinking about here. But basically, when you're doing these, like I touched on before, you're training the muscles that assist in the main movement. And the way I think about this is really each muscle, not each muscle, but a lot of the muscles involved here, and I chose these for a reason, is that like in the squat and the deadlift, for example, your hamstrings are primarily extending the hip. It's a little bit different in the squat, but like primarily your hamstrings are extending the hip, right? But the hamstrings also have a function in flexing the knee under load, right? So there's not a lot of loaded knee flexion, if any at all, in these main movements. So if you do a leg curl, you can load the knee flexion, which is going to cause your hamstrings to grow rapidly in the short term because you're taking advantage of that novice effect. And then that's going to, because they're now bigger, you have more muscle fibers to then aid in hip extension. Same thing with the LTE, right? You have 3 heads of the tricep. You really primarily use, I think it's the medial head in your pressing movements. You really don't use the long head much at all. And then there's the lateral head, I believe. And so in the LTE, you're training a bit more of those other 2, especially the long head, right? So then you're getting those muscles larger, and then they can contribute to your pressing movements more effectively, right? And so just to stop and zoom out for a second, I just want to reiterate, by the time you're doing these, you've already done all this, your NLP, your early intermediate, right? And you've gotten strong enough that now these are heavy enough that they're going to be more effective. Because if you're starting off on day 1 and you're like, all right, I'm going to throw in incline benches and I'm going to do 85 pounds for a set of 8, right? And it's not going to do anything because it's not heavy enough. It's not stressful enough on your system. But if you've gotten your bench up to 275, 300, then you can load 185 for 8 on your incline bench on day 1. Then that's a lot more productive. It's going to do a lot more to aid your benches, right? And the same thing with these as well. So, and then beyond that, if you want to have like a class 4, for example. So I mentioned earlier, the point of these is that you're assisting the main lift with them. So while they are, cosmetic, or you're quote unquote training for aesthetics, you're really training the muscles involved so that they will aid with the main lift. So if there was an extra class of exercises, that would be like purely cosmetic in the sense that the muscles being trained are not going to aid in the main lift. Something like a calf raise, where like your calves are like, a little bit active in a low bar squat, but they're not like getting your calves huge is not going to like blow up your squat, right? So you can train your calves if you want them to look nicer, but that's on your own time. That is not productive as far as this goes. The preacher curl, same kind of thing there. You're just training a very, very small muscle with a very, very light weight. Um, but yeah, and then speaking of bang for your buck and productivity, you don't have to do any of these. I still recommend doing these, like the high bar squat, the incline bench. You can get a good little bit of juice out of that. But you don't really have to do any of these. They're just kind of, if you've trained for this long, you probably enjoy training. And these movements can be fun to do, and it's a good, change of pace at this point in your training. So it's good to throw them in at the end of the workout. You're still going to get most of the bang from your, or you're going to get the large majority of the bang for your buck from the main lifts and the close variations still, right? So this is like the extra 5% at the end, the dessert, as I like to call it. So let's go through some of these sample workouts here, and then we can kind of talk about how we program this, right? So we have like a max effort day for the bench right here. You might start off with any kind of heavy work. It could be triples, singles, anywhere in like the 1 to 5 rep range, as I put it here. And it could be a bench, it could be a close grip bench, a pause bench. But the way I like to program for myself is I enjoy the conjugate style programming with the exercise variations. I think that's very fun. So you start off with the heaviest single you can possibly do for that day, and then you do some back off work, like some triples at around between like 80 and 90%, depending on the person. So we got like a heavy single for the bench, got a couple triples, right? 7 heavy reps, and that's a lot different from your NLP where you have 15 heavy reps, right? And that's because during your NLP you are taking advantage of the novice effect. You're getting a lot of stimulus out of those 15 reps. And as you get stronger, what happens is in order to load more weight on the bar, you have to decrease the reps, right? Because volume and intensity have an inverse relationship. The heavier it is, the fewer reps you can do in total. So you kind of start at the top, and if your goal is max force production, doing 1 heavy rep, producing as much force as possible is a good way to train that. So you're training your 1 heavy rep, right? Then you do a couple back offs to still get a heavy stimulus in, but also to practice that main lift a little bit more. And then beyond that, instead of just doing higher reps with the same movement, at this point now you can just go ahead and go to a different movement, like an incline bench, for example, right? And do a few sets there. So maybe 3 sets of 5. Somewhere in like the 205 to like 250 range if you're benching 315 probably. And you'll notice that on the NLP, right, you're just doing 15 reps for upper body. Right here, you did 7 reps here. You're doing 15 more reps here. So you're at like 22 reps already. So that's a lot of stress, right? And the weight is a lot heavier too. So as time goes on and you get more advanced, the program becomes a lot more stressful. And this is kind of how that tends to happen on a lift by lift basis, right? And then you got your dessert after that, a lying triceps extension. You can put whatever you want in there. But the way I like to program something like this is like with a movement like this, you're doing so many reps that it takes a little while to get into the quote unquote effective rep range. So what that basically means is if you're doing a set of 10, only really like the last 3 reps are pretty hard and pretty effective. And the reason I said before that you can't just do 3 is because the movement will beat up your joints if it's that heavy, right? So you're just kind of, getting to that point with this first set. So the way I like to program it is I'll do like whatever weight I'm supposed to do, start off with, let's say it's like a set of 10 and I'm doing something in the 10 to 15 rep range. So I'll do a set of 10, and you're rotating this movement out a lot, by the way. So this is helpful because you don't know like what weight to start with the first time, but you have to train hard. And also another note about these, you have to train them pretty much to failure in order for them to be effective. So that's why I have here like a set of 10 as a warm-up set, and then just 1 set to failure right after that. And then as you get more comfortable and more used to doing these movements and you kind of have some more data, then you can add more sets if you need to, or you can do fewer sets if you need to. But this is a good starting point. Just do like what I call like a primer set, and then you just kind of go all out until you fail in the next one. And let's say it's my first time doing these, and I did a set of 10, and then I went to failure and I got like 20 reps, then I would probably add like 10 pounds the next time and try to hit, like, let's say my target's like 15 reps, then I'll try to hit that 15 rep target. But yeah, then right here, same kind of thing. With squat and deadlift, it's a little bit different in the sense that you can do, actually I should probably change this because I don't actually mean a Penlay row from the floor is what I'll say. All right, but we have a squat, right? Same kind of thing here. We're doing that heavy single, couple triples, right? Then for the back off movement, I probably wouldn't do another squat. I would probably do like a deadlift variation because the squat and the deadlift have a lot of carryover. And then you can kind of train more of, let's say like the posterior in this slot. And then on your deadlift day, as you can see, you can kind of train more of your squat on the other day. But anyways, yeah, so this is the stiff leg deadlift. That's my back off after the squat. You can do like 1 set, 2 sets, anywhere from 1 to 3 sets generally for something like that. I would generally do fewer on the lower body movements than I would on the upper body. And then after that, we have a little barbell row from the floor, as I said, because I don't want it to be like too stressful. But something where you're like pausing and then rowing it up and that sort of thing. This would probably be a lot lighter than that actually. Probably be more in like the 205 range, something like that, if you're actually doing it more strict like that. But you could do like, chest support and rows or something like that. Generally, what I like to do for this third slot for bench and for press, I'll do like either triceps or like pecs or shoulders. And then for the lower body, I'll probably always do like something for the back. And it's usually either like a row or a chin up or a pull up or something like that. Yeah, and then the deadlift one, same kind of thing. We have the pause squat as the other one. This can be a pause squat, a high bar squat, an SSB squat. Doesn't matter. You can do anywhere from like 3 to 10 reps depending on the movement, right? And then you have the chins after that. And then also depending on how you're structuring your, actually the reason I put pause squat here is because if you're doing like a bro split, let's say, quote unquote, where you have like 1 lift per day, if you have a heavy squat and a heavy deadlift in the same week, then I would do something like this. But generally the way I program this is you're only doing a squat or a deadlift in one given week, usually not both in the same week, and you're rotating them. So that's why I have the pause squat here, because let's say your next week's movement is the pause squat, then you can practice that. And these are going to be more, they're going to be pretty far from failure. You're just kind of practicing and getting some volume in there for the following week. But yeah, so 2 different ways to program. Then for the volume day, for either of these lifts, the bench one, right? You could do something like this, where same kind of things I was saying before. The close grip bench could be like your warm up for the following week's close grip bench, if that's going to be your heavy day the next week. Or you could throw like incline bench here if you're just doing like bench week after week and you're doing something more like rep based with like the 8. It would say like Andy Baker's like 8-5-2 program, or you're doing like 5-3-1 or something like that. And then usually you can throw like your strict presses after that if you're going to do those. I actually prefer to have, if someone's going to do strict presses, I usually just have them do that as the main pressing movement. I usually train that first and then do the bench volume right after it. And then after that, you have like a dumbbell bench here. Same kind of thing as before. You do like a little primer set, then you do an AMRAP set. A little bit of work for the pecs. And you can do the same thing with like, a seated dumbbell shoulder press sort of thing. If you want to train the delts, whatever your target muscle is for that session, right? And here's an example of a volume day. If you are doing this kind of setup, where you have like basically all your like main movement work on one day, and this is more of an accessory day, you might do like a high bar squat first, 1 to 3 sets of 8, and then like an RDL, 1 to 3 sets of 8, and then some rows to finish off, like I said before, that sort of thing. Also, that would probably be a lot lighter if it was that. But anyways, yeah, that's a pretty good way to structure your training if you're intermediate or advanced. I think I laid out the reasons for doing these. Just to reiterate, right? This is the bulk of your progress still. You can get away with not doing this at this point. So you can just, if you're at this stage and you're pressed for time, you can cut off this last movement and just do like these first two, and you'll be done in like an hour basically with your workout most of the time. So it's very time effective. And because you've gotten so strong, right, you can stress yourself to a very large degree, and it's going to be enough to keep making progress. So like I said here with this bench, right, if you're doing 3 sets of 5 at 185 early in the NLP, that's it for your bench. But if you're doing this here, even if you cut off the dessert, you're doing 15 reps at 225 with an incline bench, which is harder. So that's already like a lot more stressful. And then you have these 7 super heavy reps with the bench as well, right? So you don't need to do as many sets and reps, especially with the main movement, but just in general, overall, the stronger you are. But yeah, I think I covered everything there. So bulk of your progress can come from the main lifts. The class 2, very beneficial once you start reaching the later intermediate phase. And then these bad boys can be fun to do, and they are going to help kind of round out your physique at this point if that's something you care about. But they're also going to contribute to the main lift, depending on which ones you choose. Yeah, so experiment with those, because when you're advanced, everything is a lot more individual. So you're going to have to kind of like play with these and figure out which ones actually work for you, which ones you respond to. But yeah, I think that's it for this video. If you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments, and I'll try to respond to them. But yeah, I think that's it. All right, goodbye.